A black man checks into Atlanta's most prestigious hotel, only to have his reservation lost and security called when he refuses to back down. Beaten and thrown into the rain, he's dismissed by staff who see only someone powerless, someone easy to erase. But 20 minutes later, the lobby erupts in chaos as the very people who targeted him are publicly fired, unaware that the man they tried to humiliate is the CEO of the hotel. In a single night, arrogance meets justice, and the truth cannot be denied. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Rain drummed against the glass doors of the Stanton Grand Hotel as Jamal Bennett made his way through the revolving entrance. His leather shoes clicked purposefully across the polished marble floor, the sound echoing through the grand lobby with its crystal chandeliers and gilded mirrors. The brown leather jacket he wore was barely dampened. He'd timed his dash from the car perfectly. Rolling his carry-on bag behind him, Jamal approached the front desk with the confidence of someone who'd stayed at luxury hotels countless times before. The gleaming brass name tag on the clerk's blazer read, Chloe Parker. She looked up from her computer screen, her practiced smile faltering slightly as she took in his appearance. "Welcome to the Stanton Grand. How may I assist you today?" Her tone was crisp, professional, but held none of the warmth she'd shown to the elderly white couple who'd just finished checking in ahead of him. "Good afternoon. I have a reservation for the penthouse suite under Bennett." Jamal's voice was steady and clear, carrying just enough across the marble expanse to be heard by nearby guests without seeming aggressive. Chloe's fingers moved across her keyboard with exaggerated precision. Her brow furrowed as she stared at the screen. "I'm not seeing anything under that name. Are you certain you have the correct hotel?" From the corner of his eye, Jamal noticed a tall man in an expensive suit watching from near the concierge desk. The night manager's badge identified him as Blake Stevens, and his stance suggested barely contained suspicion. "Yes, I'm certain. Please check again. Jamal Bennett." The reservation was confirmed last week. Jamal maintained his pleasant expression, though he recognized the familiar dance beginning to unfold. Chloe's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir, I've checked thoroughly. There's nothing here." Jamal reached into his jacket's inner pocket and removed his ID along with a printed copy of his reservation confirmation. "Here's my identification and booking details. Would you mind double-checking using the confirmation number?" The manager, Blake, began moving toward them with measured steps. Each click of his shoes against the marble floor seemed to raise the tension in the air. Nearby guests were beginning to take notice, some pausing their conversations to watch the scene unfold. Jamal calmly pulled out a small black notebook and pen from his briefcase. "While you're verifying that, could you please provide me with your full name and employee number? Standard procedure, I'm sure you understand." Chloe's professional mask slipped further. "Sir, that won't be necessary. As I've stated, there's no reservation." "Actually, it is necessary," Jamal replied, his voice remaining steady as he began writing. "I'd also like a copy of the hotel's guest policies and the name of your general manager." Blake inserted himself into the conversation, positioning himself slightly in front of Chloe. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem at all," Jamal responded, turning a fresh page in his notebook. "I'm simply requesting verification of my reservation and following standard documentation procedures." "And you are?" "Blake Stevens, night manager." The words came out clipped and cold. "Sir, if you don't have a valid reservation, I'll have to ask you to leave." Jamal continued writing, his pen moving smoothly across the paper. "Mr. Stevens, I understand protocol. I'm simply requesting proper verification of my booking and documentation of this interaction. Would you mind spelling your last name for my records?" Several guests had stopped pretending not to watch. A young couple near the elevator whispered to each other, while an older businessman frowned disapprovingly at the staff's behavior. "This is private property," Blake said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "We have the right to refuse service." "Of course you do," Jamal agreed pleasantly, still writing. "I'd like the specific reason for refusal in writing, please, along with a copy of your guest policies regarding reservation verification procedures." Chloe's fingers had stopped moving on the keyboard entirely. She looked between Blake and Jamal, her discomfort evident. More guests were gathering in the lobby, some pretending to check their phones while obviously listening in. Jamal smiled warmly at a family walking past, then returned his attention to his notebook. "I'll also need the contact information for your corporate offices, please. Just standard procedure, you understand?" The tension in Blake's jaw was visible now. "Sir, if you continue to harass my staff..." "Documentation isn't harassment, Mr. Stevens," Jamal interrupted smoothly, turning another page. "I'm simply creating a record of our interaction. Now, about those policies." The lobby had grown quieter, the usual bustling atmosphere replaced by the sound of Jamal's pen scratching against paper and the distant hum of the air conditioning. Every word, every movement, every micro-expression was being carefully noted in his small black notebook, while the staff's frustration mounted visibly with each passing moment. Chloe's fingers drummed against the polished desk, her professional demeanor cracking further with each passing second. Her eyes darted to Blake, then back to Jamal, who continued making careful notes in his book. Under her breath, just loud enough for Jamal to hear, she muttered a racial slur that made several nearby guests gasp. Jamal's pen paused mid-sentence. He looked up slowly, his expression unchanged. "I'm sorry, Ms. Parker, could you repeat that? I want to make sure I quote you accurately in my documentation." The color drained from Chloe's face. A woman waiting in line behind Jamal covered her mouth in shock. An elderly man shook his head in disgust. "I didn't say anything," Chloe snapped, her voice shaking slightly. "You're hearing things." "Actually," said a woman in a business suit standing nearby, "I heard it quite clearly." She stepped forward, pulling out her own phone. "And I'd be happy to provide a statement." Jamal nodded appreciatively to the woman before turning back to the desk. "I'd like to speak with your general manager or guest relations representative now, please." Blake moved closer, placing both hands on the counter and leaning forward. His expensive suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. "The general manager isn't available, and you're becoming disruptive." "Documenting discriminatory behavior isn't disruption, Mr. Stevens," Jamal replied, his voice steady. "It's my right as a guest, or potential guest, to request proper service and documentation." Blake's hand moved to his lapel, pressing a small button. Within moments, 3 security guards appeared from different corners of the lobby. Hank Murphy, the head of security, led the group, his former police officer's stance obvious in his rigid posture. Troy and Lester flanked him, both moving with practiced intimidation. The lobby grew quieter as the guards approached. Phones appeared in guests' hands, some openly recording now. A young mother pulled her children closer to her side, watching with worried eyes. "Is there a problem here?" Hank asked, his hand resting casually on his belt near his taser. "No problem," Jamal answered before Blake could speak. "I'm simply requesting verification of my reservation and proper documentation of this interaction." He turned a fresh page in his notebook. "And you gentlemen are—" Hank's jaw tightened. "Head of Security Murphy. These are Officers Troy and Lester. Sir, if you're not a registered guest, you need to leave." "I'm attempting to verify my registration now," Jamal said calmly, noting down their names. "As I've been explaining to Mr. Stevens and Ms. Parker, I have a confirmed reservation that they seem unable to locate." I'm simply requesting they follow standard procedure to resolve this situation. The security guards positioned themselves in a wall beside Jamal, their presence impossible to ignore. Troy shifted his weight, making his heavy boots squeak against the marble floor. Lester crossed his arms, his security badge catching the light from the chandeliers above. Once again, Jamal continued, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent lobby, I'm requesting that you double-check my reservation under Bennett, Jamal Bennett. I'm also requesting written documentation of any reason for service refusal, along with copies of relevant guest policies. Blake and Chloe exchanged looks, their mockery barely concealed. Chloe's lips curled into a smirk as she deliberately pushed her keyboard away. Sir, as we've stated, there's nothing here for you. The crowd in the lobby had grown. Business travelers paused with their luggage, phones discreetly recording. Hotel staff hovered at the edges of the scene, some looking uncomfortable, others watching with obvious concern. Mr. Murphy, Jamal said, addressing the head of security while continuing to write, I'd like to confirm that you're aware I'm simply requesting standard customer service and documentation. Nothing more, nothing less. Hank shifted his stance, moving slightly closer. Sir, when hotel staff asks you to leave, I understand property rights, Jamal interrupted smoothly. I also understand discrimination laws. Now, would you mind spelling your last name for my records? The tension in the lobby was palpable. A bellhop dropped a bag, the thud echoing through the space like a thunderclap. Someone's child asked, too loudly, Mommy, why are those men being mean to that guy? Blake's face had turned an interesting shade of red. This is your final warning. Leave now, or what, Mr. Stevens? Jamal asked, his pen never stopping its steady documentation. Please, be specific. I want to quote you accurately. More phones appeared among the gathered crowd. A businessman in an expensive suit stepped forward, clearly about to intervene. The security guards adjusted their positions, creating an even tighter wall around Jamal, who continued writing in his notebook with deliberate calm. I'm still waiting for verification of my reservation, Jamal said clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed lobby. And I'm still requesting fair, documented service. That's all. The tension in the lobby crackled like static before a storm. Hank Murphy's boots squeaked against the marble floor as he took another step toward Jamal. Troy and Lester moved in sync, creating a triangle around their target. The crowd held its collective breath, phones raised high, capturing every moment. Last chance, Hank growled, his hand now gripping his belt. Put the notebook away and leave. Jamal kept writing, his pen steady despite the growing threat. I'm documenting your names and actions, gentlemen. Please maintain a professional distance. A vein pulsed in Hank's temple. Without warning, he lunged forward, shoving Jamal hard in the chest. The notebook slipped from Jamal's hands, skidding across the polished floor. Several guests gasped. A woman's voice called out, Leave him alone! Don't make this worse than it needs to be, Jamal said, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. We can handle this properly. Hank grabbed Jamal's left arm, twisting it behind his back. The brown leather of Jamal's jacket creaked under the strain. Troy moved in from the right, reaching for Jamal's other arm. But Jamal wasn't helpless. As Troy grabbed him, Jamal planted his feet and drove his elbow back, catching Troy square in the chest. The guard stumbled backward, arms windmilling, and crashed into an elegant side table. Crystal champagne flutes exploded across the floor like delicate bombs. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the lobby. Stop resisting! Hank shouted, tightening his grip. Lester charged in, his fist driving deep into Jamal's stomach. The punch knocked the wind from Jamal's lungs. He doubled over, gasping, but refused to go down. Blake's voice cut through the chaos. Get him out! Any means necessary. He's trespassing and violent. More guests were filming now. An older woman in pearls shouted, "This is disgusting! Stop this at once!" A businessman stepped forward to intervene, but Chloe blocked his path, spreading her arms. "Sir, please stay back," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Security has this under control." Hank wrapped his arm around Jamal's throat, trying to force him down. Jamal struggled to breathe, but kept his feet. His expensive watch caught the light as he grabbed Hank's arm, trying to relieve the pressure. Troy had recovered and rejoined the fight, landing a punch to Jamal's ribs. The crack of impact made several onlookers cry out in protest. A child started crying somewhere in the crowd. "You're making a mistake," Jamal managed to say, his voice strained but clear. Lester's response was another punch, this one catching Jamal's mouth. Blood sprayed across the white marble floor. A tooth skittered away like a dropped pearl. "Look at the cameras!" a woman shouted, waving her phone. "We're all recording this." Blake stepped forward, straightening his tie. "This man is trespassing and became violent when asked to leave. Security is following protocol." A teenage girl's voice cut through the chaos. "That's a lie. He was just writing in his notebook." Hank tightened his chokehold. Jamal's face was turning red, but his eyes never left Blake's face. Even now, being beaten and choked, something in his expression made Blake step back. The crowd parted, a mix of horror and outrage on their faces. Phones followed Jamal's journey, recording every grunt, every drop of blood, every scuff mark left on the floor. "You won't get away with this," someone called out. Chloe's laugh was sharp and nervous. "He's the one who'll be in trouble. Did you see him attack our security?" But the crowd had seen everything. They'd seen the notebook, the calm requests, the first shove. Their phones had captured it all. Jamal's feet found purchase on the floor one last time. Despite the blood, despite the chokehold, despite the pain clearly written across his face, he managed to stand straight. His torn jacket hung from his shoulders like battle damage, but his dignity remained intact. "Remember this moment," he said, his voice carrying across the lobby. Blood stained his teeth, but his words were clear. Lightning flashed across the sky as he turned away from the hotel, limping toward the payphone he could see glowing at the corner. Each step sent fresh waves of pain through his body, but he refused to show weakness. His shoes squelched with water, his clothes hung heavy and wet, but his spine remained straight. The payphone stood like a beacon in the rain, promising connection, promising revenge. Jamal's fingers trembled as he reached for it, blood and rain dripping from his split lip onto the metal surface. The rain drummed against the payphone booth as Jamal's trembling fingers dialed the familiar number. Blood from his split lip dripped onto the keypad, mixing with rainwater. His ribs screamed in protest as he leaned against the scratched plastic wall, waiting for the connection. "Valerie Kim speaking," came the crisp, professional voice. "It's time," Jamal said, his words slightly slurred from his swollen lip. "Are we ready?" There was a brief pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. "All documents are signed and filed. The acquisition was completed an hour ago. You officially own the parent company and all its properties, including the Stanton Grand." Her voice hardened. "What happened? You sound injured." "They showed their true colors," Jamal replied, touching his split lip gingerly. "Send the team. Now. Already dispatching them. The lawyers are 5 minutes out. Our security detail is closer." Valerie's typing echoed through the line. "Should I call medical?" "No time. Just get them here." Jamal hung up, stepping back into the downpour. He used the reflection in a nearby store window to assess the damage. His face was a mess of blood and bruises, his expensive suit ruined. The brown leather jacket, a gift from his mother, hung in tatters. Using rainwater and his handkerchief, he cleaned his face as best he could, straightened his tie, and smoothed back his wet hair. 2 black SUVs screeched around the corner, followed by a sleek town car. They pulled up to the curb where Jamal waited, their headlights cutting through the rain. Professional security personnel emerged first, all wearing dark suits and earpieces, a stark contrast to the thugs inside. Marcus, the head of Jamal's new security team, approached with an umbrella. "Sir, are you all right?" His eyes narrowed at Jamal's injuries. "I'm fine," Jamal said, standing straighter despite the pain. "Let's finish this." The town car's door opened, and 3 lawyers stepped out, carrying leather briefcases. They flanked Jamal as he marched toward the hotel entrance, a formation of justice approaching its target. Through the revolving doors, Jamal strode into the lobby he'd been dragged from minutes before. Guests gasped at his return, phones rising again to record. Blake and Chloe stood frozen behind the desk, their smug expressions melting into confusion at the sight of the professional entourage. Hank moved to intercept them, hand reaching for his baton. "I thought we told you." Marcus stepped forward, his security team spreading out. "Touch him, and you'll be charged with assault." His voice was ice-cold, professional. "Stand down." Blake found his voice, though it quivered slightly. "This is private property. You can't just—" "Actually," Jamal's lead lawyer interrupted, opening his briefcase, "this property now belongs to Mr. Bennett." He produced a stack of documents. "As of 45 minutes ago, Mr. Bennett is the majority owner of Stanton Hotels International and all its subsidiaries, including this establishment." The lobby fell silent. Chloe's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering on the marble desk. Blake's face drained of color. Hank's hand fell away from his baton. Jamal stepped forward, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "Blake Stevens, Chloe Parker, Henry Murphy, Troy Davidson, and Lester Williams, you are all terminated for cause, effective immediately." He turned to Marcus. "Please escort them from the premises. Their personal belongings will be shipped to them." "You can't," Blake sputtered, but Jamal cut him off. "I can, and I am. Your behavior tonight was recorded by multiple witnesses. Assault, discrimination, destruction of property." Jamal's eyes were steel. "You're lucky I'm only firing you. Now get out." Marcus's team moved in, professionally, but firmly guiding the former employees toward the door. Chloe burst into tears, her earlier cruelty replaced by panic. Blake tried to argue but was silenced by the sight of his termination papers. Hank, Troy, and Lester were escorted out first, their security badges and keys confiscated. The same doors they'd thrown Jamal through now closed behind them, a fitting symmetry to their downfall. The lobby had transformed into an arena of whispers and wide eyes. Guests who had watched Jamal's beating now witnessed his triumph. Some looked ashamed, others impressed, all of them stunned by the reversal of power. From the back of the lobby, an older black woman in a housekeeper's uniform caught Jamal's attention. Marcy Johnson had worked at the Stanton Grand for 30 years, enduring countless indignities in silence. Her eyes met Jamal's, shining with unshed tears of gratitude and recognition. She gave him a small nod, one that carried the weight of decades of waiting for this moment. Blake, the last to be escorted out, turned at the revolving door. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Jamal stood at the center of his lobby, blood still drying on his lip, rain still dripping from his torn jacket. But his voice was steady, powerful. "No, Blake, you didn't know who you were dealing with. That was your mistake." The doors spun one final time, and Blake was gone. The former tormentors had been cast out into the same rain they'd thrown Jamal into. The symmetry was perfect, the justice poetic. Guests and staff remained frozen, watching Jamal, their new owner, still bearing the wounds of their complicity or silence. Marcy stepped forward slightly, her presence a quiet reminder of all those who had suffered before this moment of reckoning. Morning sunlight streamed through the Stanton Grand's towering windows, casting long shadows across the marble lobby. The usual morning bustle had been replaced by clusters of whispering staff members, their phones displaying viral videos of last night's events. "Did you see how they beat him?" a young valet whispered, showing his screen to a bellhop. And then he came back as the owner. The footage had exploded overnight. Local news vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like metal trees. Inside, housekeepers paused their duties to watch coverage on the lobby's mounted TVs. Luxury hotel scandal. New owner beaten. Returns to fire racist staff scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Social media buzzed with hashtags Stanton Grand Reckoning and Justice Served trending locally. Marcy Johnson stood at her cleaning cart, watching the coverage with a mix of hope and anxiety. 30 years of witnessed abuse played through her mind as she straightened her uniform. Down the hall, Carlos Ramirez adjusted his bellhop cap, remembering every slur and forgotten tip from the guests Blake had favored. The elevator dinged, and Jamal emerged, his injuries from the night before more visible in daylight. A purple bruise colored his jaw, his split lip slightly swollen. He'd changed into a fresh suit, but carried his torn brown leather jacket over one arm, a reminder of what had happened. Valerie Kim walked beside him, tablet in hand, already working. The press wants statements, social media's exploding, and the old staff's lawyer called. They're threatening wrongful termination suits. "Let them try," Jamal replied, scanning the lobby. His eyes found Marcy first, then Carlos. "Those two. I want to speak with them." Marcy approached cautiously, decades of conditioning making her hesitant despite the changes. Carlos joined them, standing straighter than usual. "Mr. Bennett," Marcy began, her voice soft but steady. "I've been here 30 years. What I saw them do to you?" She shook her head. "It wasn't the first time, not even close." "Tell me," Jamal said, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the lobby. For the next hour, Marcy and Carlos shared their stories. Marcy described the lost paychecks for black staff, the scheduling errors that kept minorities from prime shifts, the sexual harassment complaints that disappeared from HR files. Blake had a system, Carlos explained, his hands clenching. Rich white guests got the red carpet. Anyone else got accidentally overcharged, rooms suddenly unavailable, belongings going missing. Valerie documented everything, her fingers flying across her tablet. Jamal listened, his expression growing darker with each revelation. "Show me the records," he finally said. Marcy glanced around nervously. "Some things. I kept copies, just in case, hidden in the supply closet. I know where they stash the real payroll books," Carlos added. "Behind a loose panel in the basement. Been watching them for months." Jamal stood. "Marcy, effective immediately. You're our new director of staff relations. Carlos, you're head of security. We're going to need your knowledge." Their eyes widened. Marcy's hand flew to her mouth. "Mr. Bennett, are you sure?" "More than sure. And please, call me Jamal." He checked his watch. "Meet me in my office in 20 minutes. Bring everything you've got." As they dispersed, movement caught Jamal's eye. Through the front windows, he spotted Blake, Chloe, and the former security team huddled near a news van. Blake was gesturing angrily, Chloe crying for the cameras, playing victim. "They're not finished," Valerie warned, following his gaze. "Neither are we," Jamal replied. Upstairs in his office, formerly Blake's sanctuary of discrimination, Jamal cleared the desk of its previous occupants' belongings. Photos of Blake with various wealthy guests went into a box, along with a Confederate flag paperweight that made Jamal's jaw clench. Marcy arrived first, carrying a worn shoebox full of carefully dated notes and photographs. "Been keeping these since '95, she explained, laying out faded papers. "Every incident, every slur, every accident that wasn't really an accident." Carlos appeared next, struggling under the weight of 3 ledger books. "Found these behind that panel. 2 sets of books, one for the inspectors, one for real. Different pay rates based on race, if you can believe it." Valerie began scanning documents immediately, creating digital copies. "This is decades of evidence. Systematic discrimination, wage theft, harassment." She looked up at Jamal. "They're going to fight back hard when this comes out." "Let them," Jamal said, examining a particularly damning payroll entry. "The truth doesn't hide forever." They worked through the morning, piecing together years of injustice. Each document told a story. Christmas bonuses that never reached minority staff, guest complaints suspiciously targeting certain employees, maintenance requests from black guests mysteriously delayed. "Look at this," Carlos said, pointing to a series of notations. "They even tracked which guests fit the Stanton image." Their words, not mine. Marcy nodded grimly. "Had a code system, too. Category A guests got upgrades. Category C got lost reservations." She met Jamal's eyes. Guess which category meant what? The sun climbed higher outside as they worked, casting their shadow of justice across decades of darkness. In the lobby below, staff whispered about changes already visible. Marcy in professional clothes instead of her uniform, Carlos directing security instead of carrying bags. A new day had dawned at the Stanton Grand, and with it, the promise of long-overdue change. Twilight settled over Atlanta as a black Mercedes pulled up to the Piedmont Club, its tinted windows reflecting the warm glow of gas lamps. Chester Rawlins stepped out, his silver hair immaculate, Italian leather shoes clicking against cobblestones. The doorman nodded deferentially, recognizing the man who'd been a fixture of Atlanta's elite for 4 decades. Inside, the private dining room smelled of aged leather and Cuban cigars. The Whisper Circle, 12 of Atlanta's most influential businessmen, sat around a mahogany table, their faces illuminated by crystal chandeliers. Ice clinked in tumblers of bourbon as Chester took his seat at the head of the table. "Gentlemen," Chester began, his voice carrying the smooth authority of old money, "we have a situation at the Stanton Grand." He loosened his tie slightly, the only visible sign of his fury. "Some upstart thinks he can waltz in and change the natural order of things." Felix Morrison, Chester's right-hand man, distributed tablets showing the viral videos of Jamal's confrontation and triumphant return. The men watched, their expressions darkening. "This Bennett character," Chester continued, "bought the hotel through shell companies, slipped right past our radar." He took a measured sip of bourbon. "Now he's firing good people, our people, and promoting the help above their station." William Blackwood, a media mogul, cleared his throat. "My stations can spin this, paint him as an aggressive outsider, maybe suggest some criminal connections." He smiled thinly. "Amazing what selective editing can do." "Already handled," Felix interjected, tapping his tablet. "I've got edited footage ready to go. Shows Bennett attacking security unprovoked, makes him look unhinged." The screen displayed carefully cropped clips, removing the guard's initial assault. Chester nodded approvingly. "Good, but we need more pressure. Richard, your construction unions. I want picket lines by morning. Marcus, your restaurants need to cancel their contracts with the hotel kitchen." The men scribbled notes, decades of backroom dealings making this familiar territory. They'd crushed other outsiders before, maintaining their grip on Atlanta's business community through a careful balance of public pressure and private threats. "What about legal angles?" asked James Patterson, senior partner at the city's largest law firm. "We could file harassment suits on behalf of the fired employees, tie him up in court, drain his resources." Chester's eyes glinted. "Do it. And make sure Judge Thompson gets the cases. He owes me several favors." He turned to Felix. "I want everything on Bennett. Where he came from, who he knows, what skeletons he's hiding. Everyone has something to hide." Felix pulled out a preliminary report. "Already started, sir. He grew up poor in South Atlanta, worked his way through college, built a tech company, sold it for millions. Clean record, but—" He smiled coldly. "We'll find something. Everyone's got dirt. It's just a matter of how deep we need to dig." The room hummed with malicious energy as plans took shape. Harold Winston, who owned half the city's commercial real estate, proposed calling in loans on any business connected to Bennett. Thomas Green, head of the Chamber of Commerce, suggested a whisper campaign questioning the hotel's safety under new management. "Remember," Chester said, refilling glasses, "we're not just protecting the Stanton. This is about precedent. If Bennett succeeds, others will follow. Our way of life depends on maintaining proper boundaries." Murmurs of agreement circled the table. These men had spent generations building their power structure, and they wouldn't let it crumble without a fight. As midnight approached, Chester stood by the window, watching the city lights. Felix joined him, tablet in hand. "First protesters will arrive at 7 a.m. We've got people from 3 different groups, some focusing on employee rights, others on hotel safety. Media's already booked." Through the glass, they could see the Stanton Grand's illuminated facade in the distance. Chester's reflection showed a hint of a sneer. "Make sure our people get good footage. Crying employees, angry customers, the works." "What about Marcy and Carlos?" Felix asked. "The ones Bennett promoted?" Chester's expression hardened. "Find their pressure points. Everyone has family, debts, secrets. Make them regret choosing the wrong side." The other members began gathering their coats, plans set in motion. Each had their role: media manipulation, legal harassment, economic pressure, and social ostracism. It was a playbook they'd refined over decades of maintaining control. "One more thing," Chester called out as they prepared to leave. "Anyone doing business with Bennett or the hotel is doing business with none of us. Make that very clear to your contacts." The men nodded grimly. In Atlanta's business community, such threats carried weight. Contracts would be canceled, partnerships dissolved, doors closed. As the room emptied, Chester remained at the window, Felix at his side. "Sir," Felix said quietly, "what if we can't find anything on Bennett?" Chester turned, his face cast in shadow. "Then we create something. I didn't spend 40 years building this city's proper order to watch it destroyed by some outsider with delusions of equality." Outside, the first hints of dawn began creeping over Atlanta's skyline. In a few hours, the carefully orchestrated chaos would begin at the Stanton Grand's doors. Chester Rollins allowed himself a small smile, confident in the power of the system he'd helped build. Felix checked his phone one last time. "First wave of protesters is mobilizing, sir. They'll be in position before the morning news crews arrive." Dawn crept over Atlanta, painting the Stanton Grand's marble facade in soft pink light. Jamal stood at his penthouse window, phone in hand, watching the growing crowd below. Signs bobbed in the morning air. "Save our jobs," "Dangerous management," and worse. Some with racial slurs barely concealed in clever wordplay. His phone buzzed. Another news alert. The Atlanta Business Chronicle's headline glared up at him. "Hostile takeover at historic hotel. Staff alleges violence, discrimination." He scrolled through the article, jaw tightening at the carefully edited security footage, showing only his defensive moves, none of the guard's initial assault. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Valerie entered, already immaculate in her charcoal suit, despite the early hour. Her arms were full of newspapers and tablets. "It's bad," she said, spreading the morning papers across his desk. "They're running coordinated stories across all major outlets. The fired staff gave interviews claiming wrongful termination. They're painting you as an aggressive outsider who bought his way in to settle personal scores." Jamal picked up the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. His own face stared back at him, caught mid-struggle with security, looking exactly as they wanted him to look. Angry, dangerous, out of control. "Channel 4 is running special coverage," Valerie continued, turning on the suite's TV. "They're interviewing Blake right now." On screen, Blake sat in a studio, looking wounded and professional in a crisp blue suit. "I tried to de-escalate the situation," he was saying, voice thick with fake emotion. "But Mr. Bennett became aggressive. We had no choice but to protect our guests and staff." Jamal muted the TV. "How's it affecting business?" Valerie's tablet chimed with updates. 3 corporate clients canceled their conference bookings. The restaurant suppliers are threatening to pull out. And, she hesitated, some of the board members are calling for an emergency meeting. They're worried about the hotel's reputation. A text message lit up Jamal's phone. "Carlos, the new head bellman. Sir, protesters are blocking staff entrance. Marcy and other minority workers getting harassed. Get security to escort our people in through the garage," Jamal ordered, already moving toward the door. "And call legal. I want to know who's funding these protesters." They rode the elevator down to the lobby, where the morning shift was trying to maintain normalcy despite the chaos outside. Through the revolving doors, news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the brightening sky. The hotel's restaurant was half empty, regular breakfast customers apparently scared away by the crowd. A few guests huddled over coffee, watching the protests through the windows with uncertain expressions. "Board meeting in 30 minutes, Valerie reminded him, checking her watch. "They've called in remotely from their offices, probably afraid to cross the picket line." Jamal straightened his tie, squaring his shoulders. "Pull up our revenue projections, staff satisfaction surveys from the last 5 years, and any documentation of complaints under the old management. They want to talk numbers? Let's talk numbers." They headed to the conference room, passing the front desk where new staff worked diligently, trying to ignore the chants from outside. A young black receptionist looked up nervously as they passed. Jamal gave her an encouraging nod. The conference room's screen flickered to life, showing 12 faces in their separate windows. The hotel's board of directors. Most wore carefully neutral expressions, but a few couldn't hide their hostility. Mr. Bennett, Douglas Wheeler, the board chairman, began without preamble. "We're deeply concerned about recent events. The hotel's reputation is finally matching reality," Jamal interrupted smoothly. "I've spent my first day uncovering systematic discrimination, wage theft, and abuse. Would you like to see the numbers?" Valerie projected spreadsheets showing years of discrepancies in pay between white and minority staff, documented incidents of harassment swept under the rug, and guest complaints that mysteriously vanished when they involved certain preferred customers. "This is inflammatory," protested Margaret Whitmore, her pearls gleaming through the video feed. "We've always maintained the highest standards." "Of oppression," Jamal finished, "but that's changing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to ensure our staff can safely enter their workplace." He stood, but Wheeler's voice cut through. "Mr. Bennett, if you continue this crusade, we may need to reevaluate your position." "Reevaluate all you want," Jamal replied calmly. "I own controlling interest. You can't remove me without cause, and I have documentation of every decision." Leaving the board members sputtering, he headed for his office. Marcy was waiting outside, her usual confident posture slightly wilted. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, glancing around. "Got a minute?" Inside his office, Marcy pulled a worn leather ledger from her bag. "Been keeping records for 20 years, she explained, opening it to reveal neat columns of dates, incidents, and names. Wage theft, discrimination, times they made us work off the clock. Got more hidden away, too. Photos, security footage they thought they deleted, letters from fired workers." Jamal leafed through the pages, each one a carefully documented testament to years of abuse. "This is exactly what we need, Marcy. Why didn't you come forward before?" She gave him a knowing look. Who would have listened? But now, she patted the ledger. "Now, maybe someone will hear us." Through the window, they could still hear the protesters, but their chants seemed less threatening now. Jamal carefully closed the ledger, this small book of secrets that might help turn the tide. The basement of the Stanton Grand Hotel felt like stepping into another era. Jamal led the way down the narrow concrete stairs, his phone's flashlight beam cutting through decades of dust. Behind him, Marcy clutched her ledger close, while Carlos and Valerie followed with their own lights. "Watch that third step," Marcy warned, her voice echoing slightly. "It's been loose since I started here 20 years ago." The air grew thicker as they descended, heavy with the musty smell of old paper and forgotten secrets. At the bottom, a maze of metal shelving stretched into the shadows, packed with boxes, files, and equipment from every decade of the hotel's history. "The old records should be in Section D," Marcy said, pointing left. "That's where they kept everything before computers. Mr. Harrison, he was manager back in the 90s. He was paranoid about keeping paper copies." They split up, each taking a row. Jamal's leather shoes left prints in the dust as he moved between shelves, examining faded labels. The beam of his light caught something, a box marked Personnel, Confidential, 1985-1995. "Over here," he called. The others gathered around as he lifted the lid. Inside, hundreds of personnel files lay in neat rows, many marked with red stamps. "Terminated," or "Special handling required." Valerie pulled out a stack, her face grim in the artificial light. "Look at these termination reasons. Attitude problems, guest complaints, failure to maintain standards, but only in files for minority staff." Carlos whistled softly, opening another box. "Check this out." He held up a yellowed envelope, thick with cash. More envelopes filled the box, each dated and labeled with initials. "Hush money?" "Keep looking," Jamal urged, moving deeper into the archive. His light swept across old furniture, broken luggage, and finally, a massive metal file cabinet, its surface scarred but solid. A heavy padlock secured the drawers. "That's it," Marcy breathed. "The special cabinet. Only managers had access. They'd go down here late at night sometimes, when they thought no one was watching." Carlos examined the lock. "It's electronic, probably from the early 2000s. Should be a keypad hidden somewhere." His fingers found a small panel that slid aside, revealing numbered buttons. "Any ideas on the code?" Marcy flipped through her ledger. "Try 1928. That's when the hotel opened." "Nothing." "Wait," Valerie said. "The old security system used the hotel's tax ID number. Maybe—" She punched in 6 digits. The lock clicked open. Inside, the drawers were packed with more envelopes, but also photographs, written statements, and small notebooks filled with dates and dollar amounts. Jamal picked up one notebook, its pages covered in neat handwriting, detailing payments to police, judges, and city officials. "This goes way beyond discrimination," Valerie murmured, photographing pages with her phone. "This is systematic corruption." A distant rumble made them all look up. "Just the subway," Carlos assured them. "But there's something else we should check. Follow me." He led them through a narrow passage to a small room, humming with old computer equipment. Dust-covered servers lined the walls, their status lights still blinking after all these years. "The old security system," Carlos explained. "They upgraded the cameras upstairs, but never bothered to clear these drives. Everything's still here, every hallway, every office, every backroom conversation they thought was private." Valerie's eyes lit up. "How far back?" "At least 5 years, maybe more." Carlos tapped a few keys on an ancient keyboard. Screens flickered to life, showing timestamp after timestamp of archived footage. "We'll need to take these," Jamal decided. "Can you get them out safely?" Carlos nodded, already disconnecting drives. "They're just standard hard drives in a fancy case. I can have them running in Valerie's office in an hour." They worked quickly, carefully removing the drives while Marcy and Jamal gathered the most damning papers from the filing cabinet. The basement's silence felt heavier now, as if the weight of all these secrets was pressing down on them. Valerie checked her watch. "Almost midnight. We should go before the night shift gets suspicious." They packed everything into cardboard boxes, trying not to disturb too much dust. As they climbed the stairs, Marcy paused, looking back at the darkness below. 20 years, she said softly. 20 years of watching them hurt people, thinking they'd never have to answer for it. Now, maybe they will. Back upstairs, the hotel was quiet, most guests asleep. A few late-night workers nodded to Jamal as they passed, carrying their boxes toward Valerie's office. The protesters were gone, but their signs lay scattered across the sidewalk outside, visible through the lobby's tall windows. Valerie's office was a corner space on the mezzanine level, modern and efficient like its occupant. She cleared space on her desk while Carlos set up the drives, connecting them to her computer system. "This will take time," she said, watching file names scroll across her screen. "Days, maybe weeks to go through everything. But if what we saw downstairs is any indication, take as long as you need," Jamal replied. "Do it right. Document everything." He looked at his small team, Valerie intent at her computer, Carlos checking connections, Marcy still holding her precious ledger. They thought they buried their secrets so deep no one would ever find them. They were wrong. The Stanton Grand's grand ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers, transformed for the New Era celebration. Black and gold decorations adorned every table, and the sound of jazz filled the air. Jamal, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, stood near the entrance, greeting guests with genuine warmth. "Looking sharp, Mr. Bennett," Carlos said, now dressed in his new head of security uniform, complete with a polished badge. He monitored the room with professional attention, a far cry from the thuggish presence of his predecessors. Marcy, elegant in a deep purple dress, directed her newly promoted staff with quiet confidence. She'd helped organize the event, insisting on highlighting long-ignored employees. Photos of staff members, past and present, lined the walls, telling stories of dedication, despite decades of discrimination. Local news crews positioned their cameras as Atlanta's black business leaders mingled with hotel employees. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter, Sandra Chen, approached Jamal with her notebook ready. "Mr. Bennett, how does it feel seeing such transformation in just a few days?" she asked, gesturing to the diverse crowd. Jamal smiled, watching Valerie guide a group of journalists through the hotel's new initiatives. "This isn't transformation. It's recognition. These people were always here, always excellent. They just needed someone to see them." The evening progressed like a dream. Kitchen staff received standing ovations for their years of service. Housekeepers were honored with plaques and bonuses. Even some white employees who'd stood against the old regime were recognized for their courage. "To the real heroes of the Stanton Grand," Jamal raised his champagne glass during his speech. "To every person who endured, who kept their dignity, who never stopped believing in justice. This is your night. Applause thundered through the ballroom. Marcy wiped tears from her eyes as her granddaughter hugged her waist. Carlos stood straighter, pride evident in his bearing. But at precisely 10:45 p.m., everything changed. Two police officers entered through the main doors, their presence immediately drawing attention. They carried thick manila envelopes and wore grim expressions. The music faltered. "Mr. Jamal Bennett?" the taller officer called out. "We have legal documents to serve." The room fell silent as Jamal accepted the envelope. As he read, his face remained carefully neutral, but his hands tightened on the papers. Valerie appeared at his side, reading over his shoulder. Her sharp intake of breath told the crowd everything they needed to know. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jamal announced, his voice steady despite the tension, "please continue enjoying your evening. This is just a minor legal matter that requires my attention." But the damage was done. Whispers spread through the crowd. Phones emerged, capturing the moment. Sandra Chen was already typing furiously on her laptop. In the corner, board member Richard Whitman's phone buzzed. He opened an email, his face paling as he read. He quickly showed it to other board members who huddled together, shooting concerned glances at Jamal. The lawsuit, filed by Chester Rollins and his Whisper Circle, alleged systematic discrimination against white employees and illegal corporate takeover practices. It demanded immediate injunctive relief, in other words, Jamal's removal. Valerie pulled Jamal aside, speaking in urgent whispers. "The timing's not coincidental. They waited until we were most visible, most vulnerable." "Mr. Bennett?" Richard Whitman approached, his face ashen. "The board requires an emergency meeting. Now." The ballroom's celebration dissolved into chaos. Guests began leaving in groups, phones pressed to their ears. News crews repositioned for better angles of the drama. Marcy gathered her staff close, trying to maintain calm. In the boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Board members passed around printed copies of an anonymous letter, allegedly showing Jamal had bribed city officials to fast-track his takeover. The letterhead was perfect, the signatures convincing. "This is obviously fake," Jamal stated firmly. "Part of their smear campaign." "We can't take that chance," Whitman replied. "The publicity alone could destroy us. The board has voted. You're suspended pending full investigation." Jamal stood, straightening his jacket. "You're playing right into their hands." "Security will escort you out," another board member said softly, unable to meet Jamal's eyes. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." The walk through the hotel felt endless. Interim security guards, hastily hired by the board, flanked Jamal as he moved toward his penthouse to collect his things. Staff members watched from doorways and behind desks, many crying quietly. Carlos had been ordered to stand down, his promotion already reversed. He stood at attention, jaw clenched, as Jamal passed. Marcy pressed her hands together, a prayer or perhaps a gesture of helplessness. In the penthouse, Jamal packed quickly, his movements mechanical. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see news vans arriving, their lights creating a carnival atmosphere in the street below. "Your car is waiting in the garage," one of the guards said, almost apologetically. Jamal took one last look at the room, at the view of Atlanta he'd fought so hard to claim. Then, surrounded by strangers wearing security uniforms, he walked toward the service elevator, his footsteps echoing in the sudden, terrible silence. The porch light cast a warm glow as Jamal's car pulled into his mother's driveway. The modest one-story house, with its well-tended flower beds and white trim, stood peaceful against the darkening sky. Jamal sat in the driver's seat for a moment, gathering strength before grabbing his small suitcase from the passenger seat. His mother, Margaret Bennett, opened the front door before he reached it. She wore a floral housecoat and had her silver hair wrapped in a silk scarf. Her eyes took in his exhausted posture, the slight limp from his earlier beating, and the defeat written across his face. "Baby," she said softly, opening her arms. Jamal stepped into her embrace, letting his suitcase thump onto the porch. He towered over her small frame, but somehow she made him feel like a child again. Safe, protected, understood. "Come on in," she said, picking up his suitcase before he could stop her. "I've got dinner keeping warm." The house smelled like childhood. Cornbread and collard greens, with something sweet baking in the oven. Jamal followed his mother through the familiar living room, past photographs marking decades of family history. There he was at 5 years old, grinning with missing front teeth. His high school graduation, college, his first corporate job. "Sit," Margaret commanded, pointing to the kitchen table. She'd already set 2 places with her good plates, the ones with tiny blue flowers around the edges. "You need to eat something." Jamal sank into the wooden chair, his body aching. "Mama, you didn't have to." "Hush now," she interrupted, bringing over a plate piled with comfort food. A mother knows when her child needs taking care of. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Margaret watched her son pick at his food, noting how his hands trembled slightly. Finally, she set down her fork. "I saw the news," she said quietly. "Those people at that hotel, they're just like the ones your daddy and I dealt with back in the day. Think they can beat us down, make us give up." Jamal pushed a piece of cornbread around his plate. "It's different now, Mama. They're smarter about it. No white hoods or burning crosses, just lawyers and fake evidence and media manipulation." "Same devil, different suit," Margaret replied firmly. "But you listen to me, Jamal Bennett. You remember what you told me when you were 12 years old? After those boys at school tried to make you eat dirt?" Jamal's lips twitched in a small smile. "I remember." "Tell me again," she insisted. "I said I'd never beg anybody to treat me like a human being," Jamal recited. "That I'd rather stand alone than kneel to bullies." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That's my boy. And look at you now, CEO, owner of companies, changing lives. Those people at the hotel, they're scared of you. That's why they're fighting so dirty." "They took everything, Mama," Jamal said, his voice rough. "The hotel, my reputation." "They took nothing you can't get back," Margaret corrected. "Your daddy used to say, the truth is like cream. It always rises to the top. You've got good people on your side. That nice lady Marcy called here earlier, checking on you. And that young man, Carlos." Jamal straightened slightly. "They called here?" "Mm-hmm. Said they had something important to show you. They're coming by in the morning." Margaret stood and went to the oven, pulling out a sweet potato pie. "Now, you're going to eat some pie, take a hot shower, and get some sleep in your old room. Tomorrow's a new day." Later that night, Jamal lay in his childhood bed, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars still clung after 20 years. His mother's words echoed in his mind, mixing with memories of his father's quiet strength and determination. Sleep came easier than he'd expected. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee and bacon. Jamal had just finished helping his mother clear the breakfast dishes when a knock came at the door. Marcy stood on the porch, elegant even in casual clothes, clutching a thick folder. Behind her, Carlos balanced a battered laptop and several flash drives. "Mr. Bennett," Marcy said, then corrected herself. "Jamal, we've been going through everything." Margaret ushered them into the kitchen, immediately offering coffee and remaining pie. "You all sit down and do what you need to do. I'll be in my garden if you need anything." The kitchen table became a command center. Carlos opened the laptop while Marcy spread out documents from her folder. Jamal leaned forward, examining payroll records, maintenance logs, and security reports. The old surveillance system, Carlos explained, typing rapidly. They never wiped it clean when they upgraded. Years of footage, all backed up on these drives. Marcy pointed to specific entries in her ledger. And I kept track of every incident, every slur, every unfair firing. Dates, times, witnesses. 23 years of documentation. Jamal felt energy returning to his tired muscles as he studied the materials. Here was truth, solid and undeniable. Here was ammunition against the lies. The morning sun streamed through his mother's kitchen window, warming the table where they worked. Outside, Margaret's voice carried softly as she sang to her flowers. An old gospel song about triumph over tribulation. Valerie arrived just before noon, carrying her own laptop and several external hard drives. She hugged Jamal tightly before setting up her equipment next to Carlos's computer. The kitchen table groaned under the weight of technology and paperwork. "The time vault footage is incredible," Carlos said, typing commands into his laptop. "The old security system recorded everything. Audio, too. They never bothered checking what was stored down there." Jamal leaned forward as the first video began playing. The footage showed the hotel lobby from multiple angles, crystal clear despite its age. There he was, walking in calmly, speaking with Chloe. But now they could hear everything. "Look at this," Valerie said, pointing to the screen. "Before you even approached the desk." She turned up the volume. In the footage, Blake stood behind Chloe, sneering. "Heads up, one of them coming in. You know what to do." Chloe nodded, her pleasant smile already fixed in place. "No reservation found, right? Even if there is one?" "Exactly. Make him leave, or make him snap. Either way, we win." Marcy's hands clenched into fists as she watched. They did this all the time. Set people up to fail, then claimed they were being threatening. Carlos pulled up another clip from earlier that same day. Blake stood with the security team in a back office, rehearsing their story. "If he tries to record anything, we take the phone. Make it look like he attacked first. Hank, you know where to hit so it doesn't show on camera." "My God," Valerie whispered, making notes. "They planned the whole thing." The footage continued, showing the beating from angles the viral videos hadn't captured. The security guards' gleeful expressions as they pummeled Jamal. Blake filming on his phone while laughing. Chloe's voice clear as she called out racial slurs. But the real bombshell came from the Whisper Circle's regular meetings in the hotel's private dining room. The surveillance system had caught everything. Chester Rawlins's voice filled the kitchen, dripping with contempt. "This Bennett character thinks he can just walk in and take over? We've kept this hotel pure for generations. No amount of money changes what he is." They watched as Chester handed out envelopes of cash, instructing members on which city officials to bribe. The camera caught him clearly as he detailed their plan to frame Jamal. "The forged blackmail letter is key," Chester explained to his conspirators. "Make it look like he's been bribing officials all along. The board will have no choice but to remove him." Valerie paused the playback, her face flushed with anger and triumph. "We've got them. The whole conspiracy on video. Proof of systematic discrimination, assault, bribery, fraud." "Wait," Carlos said, clicking through more files. "There's something else." He pulled up footage from just last week, showing Chester's assistant alone in the private dining room, practicing signatures and typing on a laptop. "Look, this is him creating the fake blackmail letter. We can prove it never came from you." Jamal stood up and paced the kitchen, energy coursing through him. "How many years of footage do we have?" "At least 5 years of continuous recording," Carlos replied. "Plus scattered older clips going back almost 15 years. Marcy's records match up perfectly with what we're seeing." Marcy spread out her ledgers, pointing to specific entries. "Every incident, every slur, every unfair firing. I wrote it all down. Dates, times, witnesses. The footage confirms everything. Valerie was already making calls on her cell phone. "Sarah, it's Valerie Kim. I need an urgent meeting with your DOJ team." "Yes, today, if possible. We have extensive evidence of civil rights violations, conspiracy, and financial crimes at the Stanton Grand Hotel." She listened for a moment, then covered the phone. "They can meet us in 2 hours. We need to organize this footage. Make it presentable." "I'll start downloading everything to secure drives," Carlos said, fingers flying over his keyboard. "Multiple copies, backed up to cloud storage too. They can't bury this." Jamal nodded, his mind racing with strategy. "Valerie, call our PR team too. We need to plan the rollout carefully. Maximum impact, but completely legal and transparent." "Already on it," she replied, sending rapid texts. "I'm thinking we hold our evidence until the board meeting. Let them try to formalize your removal, then hit them with everything at once." "The press will eat this alive," Carlos added, grinning. "Rich white businessmen caught on camera plotting against a black owner. Actual footage of them planning assault and discrimination. It's a perfect storm." Margaret appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray of sandwiches and fresh lemonade. She took in the scene, the intense faces, the damning footage, her son's renewed energy. "Told you the truth would rise up," she said softly, setting down the tray. "Now you all eat something. Can't fight devils on an empty stomach." Valerie finished her call and immediately started another. "Jason, get the legal team ready. We're going to need injunctions, civil suits, and criminal referrals. Yes, all of it. Trust me. We have more than enough evidence." They worked through lunch, organizing the footage into clear categories: discrimination, conspiracy, assault, financial crimes. Each clip was labeled and time-stamped, matched with Marcy's detailed records. The truth, hidden for so long in the hotel's basement, was finally coming to light. The Stanton Grand's largest conference room buzzed with tension. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of leather chairs filled with board members, local media, and Chester Rawlins's associates. Their expensive suits and carefully arranged expressions couldn't hide their eagerness for what they assumed would be Jamal's final humiliation. Chester sat near the front, radiating smug confidence. He checked his gold watch and whispered to his lawyer, both men chuckling. Behind them, a cluster of federal agents stood quietly by the wall, their presence drawing nervous glances from several Whisper Circle members. Police officers flanked the doors, stone-faced and alert. Local news cameras whirred, their red lights blinking as reporters whispered into microphones, setting the scene for their viewers. Board Chairman William Hayes cleared his throat. "This emergency session will come to order. We're here to address serious allegations against Mr. Jamal Bennett and formalize." The double doors swung open. Jamal strode in, wearing his signature brown leather jacket, now perfectly restored. Valerie walked beside him, carrying a sleek laptop and several folders. Behind them came Marcy, her gray hair neat beneath a small hat, and Carlos, who had traded his bellhop uniform for a crisp suit. Last came Cynthia Reynolds, the former white manager, her face pale but determined. Chester's smile flickered as he saw Cynthia. He hadn't expected her to show up. "Mr. Bennett," Hayes began, "given the severity of the charges—" "If I may," Jamal interrupted smoothly, "I'd like to present some evidence first." He nodded to Valerie, who connected her laptop to the room's projection system. "The board has heard one version of events. Now it's time for the truth." Chester stood up, adjusting his tie. "This is irregular. We have a clear agenda." "Sit down, Mr. Rawlins," one of the federal agents called out. Chester's face reddened, but he complied. The room darkened. On the massive screen, crystal-clear security footage began to play. The audience watched in growing horror as the scene unfolded. Blake and Chloe plotting to refuse Jamal's check-in, security guards rehearsing their attack, the brutal assault itself captured from multiple angles. Every word was recorded, Jamal explained calmly. Every slur, every plan, every moment of violence. The footage shifted to the Whisper Circle's meetings. Chester's voice filled the room, discussing bribes and blackmail schemes. The camera caught him clearly handling envelopes of cash, instructing associates on which officials to target. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. A reporter gasped. Chester's lawyer frantically scribbled notes. "But that's not all," Jamal continued. "We have years of footage, systematic discrimination, wage theft, assault, all documented." Valerie clicked through clip after clip, each more damning than the last. Marcy stepped forward, her voice steady. "I kept records of every incident." She held up her ledgers. "Dates, times, victims. Everything matches the footage perfectly." Carlos added, "The hotel's basement contained a complete digital archive. They never bothered to check what the old security system was recording. Their own cameras caught it all." Chester jumped up again. "This is absurd! Doctored footage?" "The footage has been authenticated by federal forensics experts," one of the agents interrupted. "Every frame is genuine." The room erupted in murmurs. Phones buzzed as news alerts went out. Several Whisper Circle members quietly slipped toward the exits, only to find police blocking their way. Then Cynthia Reynolds stood up. The room fell silent. "I was there," she said, her voice trembling but growing stronger. "For years, I watched it happen. The discrimination, the violence, the cover-ups. I stayed quiet to protect my job, and I'll regret that forever." She turned to face Chester. "But I saw you plan it all. In that private dining room you thought was so secure. The meetings where you plotted to frame Jamal, where you forged that blackmail letter." Chester's face went from red to white. "You're lying." "We have footage of your assistant creating the forged document," Valerie said, pulling up the video. "Time-stamped, with clear audio of him discussing your instructions." The federal agents moved forward, their badges glinting. "Chester Rawlins," the lead agent announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, civil rights violations, and multiple counts of financial fraud." As agents began handcuffing Chester and several other Whisper Circle members, the board sat in stunned silence. Chairman Hayes looked physically ill. Reporters were practically climbing over each other to get better shots of the arrests. "Mr. Bennett," Hayes managed finally, we had no idea." "You could have asked," Jamal replied simply. "You could have listened to your staff. You could have looked past your own assumptions." He gestured to Marcy and Carlos. "These people tried to tell you for years." The federal agents led Chester past Jamal. The old man's carefully maintained mask had crumbled, revealing naked hatred and fear. "You'll regret this," he spat. "No," Jamal said quietly. "You already do." More agents entered the room, carrying boxes and evidence bags. They began collecting devices and documents from the arrested Whisper Circle members as reporters called out questions and cameras flashed. The afternoon sun bathed Atlanta's skyline in golden light as news helicopters circled the Stanton Grand Hotel. On every street corner, newspaper vendors called out the breaking headlines, "Hotel Empire's Racist Conspiracy Exposed," and "Whisper Circle Silenced. Justice at Stanton Grand." Inside the hotel's executive office, Jamal sat behind his restored desk, watching the coverage unfold on multiple screens. Footage of Chester Rawlins and his associates being led away in handcuffs played on repeat. Local stations aired clips from the security videos, shocking viewers with the raw evidence of discrimination and violence. Valerie entered, carrying a stack of newspapers. "The board's statement just went public," she said, handing him the top paper. They're falling over themselves to apologize. Jamal scanned the front page. The board's mea culpa was prominently featured, along with their unanimous vote to reinstate him as CEO with expanded authority over hotel operations, hiring practices, and policy implementation. They had no choice, Marcy commented from her seat by the window. She'd changed into a smart business suit, befitting her new role as Director of Staff Relations. The evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Carlos knocked and entered, now wearing the sleek black uniform of Head of Security. "Mr. Bennett, the police just confirmed. Blake and Chloe are in custody. They're facing multiple charges, including civil rights violations and filing false police reports." "What about Hank and his crew?" Jamal asked. "All three have been charged with assault," Carlos replied. "The Security Industry Association has already revoked their licenses. They won't work in hospitality again." Cynthia arrived next, carrying a thick binder labeled Whistleblower Protection Protocols. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "The legal team approved all our new reporting procedures. We're ready to implement them immediately." Jamal stood, gathering his team around the large conference table. "Let's review the announcement for this evening. Everything needs to be perfect." They spent the next hour fine-tuning the details of Jamal's major policy changes. The new equity initiatives would ensure fair hiring practices and promotion opportunities. The diversity training program would be mandatory for all staff, with regular refresher courses. Most importantly, the Marcy Johnson Scholarship Fund would provide educational support for employees' children. "I still can't believe you named it after me," Marcy said softly, touching the fund's proposal document. "Who better?" Jamal smiled. "You kept those records all those years, never losing hope that someday someone would listen." A knock interrupted them. A young staff member entered, looking nervous but excited. "Sir, the lobby is filling up. Press is here, and community leaders are arriving." Jamal checked his watch. Time to make it official. He straightened his jacket and headed for the elevator, his team falling in step behind him. The lobby had been transformed. Gone were the stuffy old portraits of previous owners, replaced by a diverse array of artwork celebrating Atlanta's rich cultural heritage. Staff members, wearing new uniforms designed without the old colonial styling, moved confidently through the crowd. Television cameras tracked Jamal's descent down the grand staircase. Reporters called out questions, but he waited until he reached the podium that had been set up near the front desk, the same spot where he'd been assaulted just days before. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed lobby. "Today marks more than just a change in leadership at the Stanton Grand. It represents a fundamental shift in how we define luxury and service." He gestured to his team, who stood proudly behind him. These individuals showed extraordinary courage in the face of systemic injustice. They refused to be silenced. Their testimony and evidence didn't just expose corruption. It proved that change is possible when we stand together. Jamal outlined the new policies. Each announcement met with applause. When he revealed the scholarship fund, Marcy dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief as the crowd gave her a standing ovation. "The old guard believed they owned more than this building," Jamal continued. "They thought they owned the right to determine who belongs here. Today, we reclaim this space for everyone who was ever made to feel unwelcome, who was ever told they didn't deserve to be here." Cameras flashed as he held up the new hotel charter, with its explicit protections for staff and guests. "The Stanton Grand will stand as a beacon of justice and dignity for all. This is not just a hotel. It's a promise that the days of whispered discrimination and hidden violence are over." In the crowd, several former employees who had suffered under the old regime openly wept. Community leaders nodded in approval. Even some of the board members, still shaken by the day's revelations, appeared moved by the transformation they witnessed. Carlos leaned over to Marcy and whispered, "Look at their faces. They never thought they'd see this day. None of us did, she replied softly. But we never stopped hoping. The lobby erupted in another round of applause as Jamal prepared to take questions from the press. The evening sun streamed through the grand windows, illuminating the space where darkness had once ruled, now filled with the light of justice, long delayed, but finally delivered. A gentle morning light filtered through the Stanton Grand's towering windows, casting warm patterns across the newly polished marble floors. The lobby hummed with activity, but it was different now, a natural, comfortable energy that made everyone feel welcome. Jamal stood near the concierge desk, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. A black family checked in without hesitation or suspicious glances. A group of Latino businesswomen strode confidently toward the conference center. Two elderly white couples chatted amiably with a young Muslim bellhop about local restaurants. The transformation was visible everywhere. New artwork adorned the walls, local pieces celebrating Atlanta's diverse heritage. The staff uniforms had been redesigned, dropping the colonial-style elements for clean, professional lines that respected every body type and cultural preference. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," called Maria, one of the housekeeping supervisors Marcy had promoted. She pushed her cart with pride, her name tag prominently displayed, no longer forced to remain invisible. "Morning, Maria. How's your son doing with those college applications? Thanks to the scholarship fund, he's already been accepted to 3 schools." Her eyes shone with joy. "I never thought." "That's exactly why we're here," Jamal smiled, touching her shoulder gently. The front desk area, once a site of humiliation, now operated with transparent efficiency. Carlos had installed new security cameras with clear sight lines, ensuring every interaction was documented. The guest rights policy was prominently displayed in multiple languages. Jamal noticed an elderly woman struggling with her rolling suitcase near the entrance. Without hesitation, he walked over, his brown leather jacket, now a symbol of his victory, catching the morning light. "May I help you with that, ma'am?" he offered, already reaching for the handle. The woman, who reminded him of his mother, beamed. "Oh, thank you, young man. These wheels aren't what they used to be." "Neither was this hotel," Jamal replied with a gentle laugh. "But we fixed that too." As he helped her to the check-in desk, he caught sight of the new portrait wall. Where stern-faced old owners once glowered, now hung photographs of current staff members. Marcy's dignified smile shone from the center, flanked by Carlos's confident stance and Cynthia's determined gaze. Each photo told a story of resilience and change. "Mr. Bennett!" Carlos called out, approaching with a group of tourism officials. "The committee wanted to see our new security protocols in action." Jamal handed the elderly guest's luggage to a bellhop, ensuring she was comfortable before turning to the officials. "Perfect timing. We're particularly proud of our transparency initiatives." As he led the tour, showing off the new public monitoring stations and explaining the anti-discrimination safeguards, staff members went about their duties with newfound confidence. No one flinched when supervisors approached. No one lowered their voice to avoid attention. Near the grand staircase, Cynthia was conducting a training session with new hires. "Remember," she said clearly, "every guest complaint is logged and reviewed. No exceptions, no matter who's involved." The morning grew busier as a conference group arrived. Jamal watched with satisfaction as his team handled the surge flawlessly. Marcy appeared at his side, her new blazer marking her executive status. "Time for the staff photo," she reminded him. Everyone's gathering in the garden courtyard. The courtyard, once reserved for exclusive events, now hosted regular community gatherings. Staff members assembled, naturally mixing across departments and positions. Carlos adjusted his security chief's badge. Cynthia straightened her whistleblower committee pin. "Look at this family we've built," Marcy whispered as they arranged themselves for the photo. The photographer, A local artist who documented the civil rights movement captured the moment. Genuine smiles, proud postures, and the unmistakable look of people who knew their worth. After the photo, Jamal found himself alone for a moment in the lobby, watching the ebb and flow of humanity through his hotel. The marble still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, but now they illuminated truth instead of hiding lies. A small figure suddenly darted across the lobby. Little Maya, Marcy's 6-year-old granddaughter, wrapped her arms around Jamal's legs. "Uncle Jamal!" she exclaimed, a title she'd given him days after the victory. "Grandma says you made it so everyone can be happy here." Jamal knelt down to her level, seeing in her bright eyes the future they'd fought for. "Your grandma made it happen too. We all did, together." Maya hugged him properly now, her small arms fierce with love. "I'm gonna work here someday," she declared. "Just like Grandma. And you'll start at the top," Jamal promised, "not the bottom like she had to." The lobby's natural light seemed to grow warmer, embracing them all in its glow. Where darkness had once ruled, where violence had once erupted, where discrimination had once seemed permanent, now stood a testament to the power of refusing to back down. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.